Well, we've passed the 10 o'clock, so I think we'll hand over to Owen to give us some good information on beverage, wines, and anything else that he can enlighten us with. So yeah. Over to you, Owen.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Robin. So I've met a few of you guys already. For those of you who don't know me, I've got wine background, but was invited to join the forum specifically because it's very much hospitality focused wine background. And what I'll hope to do today for you guys is try and give everyone, whether you're a hotel operator or procurement company, when you are actually dealing with wine, some kind of helpful hints, I hope to help you guys in terms of the profit you can deliver from wine, but equally just getting an idea of just how effective wine can be as a margin maker for your business, as opposed to just doing well on wine itself. So I'll just share my screen, 2 seconds. Okay, can we see the presentation, everyone?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, so very much like I've just explained there, really just allowing wine to truly benefit the business. And I'll hopefully be giving you guys a few tips on that. So I'll just fly through. I won't go about myself too much, but just a little background, as a lot of people here don't know me. So my consultancy business, I started to deliver business strategies, specialist wine training to hotels, restaurants and bars, to of course boost average spend and boost profits for my clients. So I've been doing this for about 15 years, and the reviews do significantly increase spend. I tend to be on around about 10% increases for people without them changing suppliers, so I can actually do tenders and support in terms of product selection, but the 10% area is without changing suppliers, so obviously very straightforward for people. And I've put there about delivering interesting lists for their customers, because it was mentioned a couple of times last time when Andy did his presentation about the food and how you actually cope with the costs whilst giving a decent menu and giving a decent wine list. So I'll hopefully cover a few points there as well. So I've just followed up on that point there, just saying about how it's those 10% increases, the basic one. So without changing supplier, without increasing entry level price point, and without any need for your staff to verbally upsell. I mean, of course, things like this can be increased further in terms of with training to improve your wine reputation, if you like, and give your customers a bit more confidence in terms of the wine. However, the wine list reviews I do tend to deliver these average spend increases without your staff needing to go and say to someone, don't try that £25 wine, try this £30 wine. There's none of that involved. And then just again talking about, Andy did a brilliant summary last week, and it was quite eye-opening for me as very much a beverage person to hear the complete depth of the food industry. Obviously I hear about it from the press, but to hear Andy talking last month was quite incredible to hear the whole depth of it. So yeah, I've just put there about having a solid beverage range and a solid sustainable beverage range to earn you good margins for your business has become more important than ever from that point of view. So I've gone to this one here. This is something that I mentioned a moment ago, rather than just thinking about wine specifically, looking at it in the bigger picture. And obviously I'm from a wine background, so I might say this, but I think hopefully quite a lot of people would agree that wine can be overlooked. I think wine can be overlooked in terms of the bigger picture for hotel operators. I don't think so much for restaurants. Obviously restaurants tend to be a lot more wine focused, but I think when it comes to hotels and pubs, it can be very much overlooked. So I've just popped a few quotes on here for you of lines I've heard from people who have ended up delivering these wine list reviews for, which I mentioned earlier, where they've not had to change supplier. And these lines here, like, we don't sell much wine, I can't change my wine, I'm tied, our supplier has wine people who do that, which is a classic one where I sort of said, well, I don't think they're telling you what I'm going to tell you, because I'm going to tell you what works for your business, not what not what the supplier wants to sell to you. And obviously we're happy with our wine list, which understandably you'll hear that quite a lot. But like I say, each of those places that I've quoted there, I've done one of my, what I'd call my more basic wine list reviews, where I've not had to stress them out with finding new suppliers and opening new accounts and tender processes and things like that. It's been sticking with the same supplier, and each of those people there achieved an increase without changing supplier of around about 10%. So as I say, I think, again, talking about wine being overlooked, again, I think because spirits and beers get so much support, you're going to get, on the beer side, you're going to get installations done by the breweries, and you're going to get support depending on what brands you take. If you're taking big brands, likewise with spirits, like it's easy for decent hotels and hotel bars to get pouring deals from spirits because they want their brand in there. Wine, because it's not so brand led, it is more about regions and grapes, doesn't tend to get that support. So I think a lot of people end up, I wouldn't say settling on a list as such, but I think a lot of people just don't see the potential they could have out of their wine list and how individual it could be. So I've kind of tried to break this down into what the problem is overall and what the solution is. So obviously some of these bits will tie in exactly with what Andy was saying, what everyone knows what's going on. I mean, logistics, paperwork, etc., staffing, logistics and warehouse. So I mean, not only everyone knows we're short of drivers in this country at the moment, but there's so many issues with warehouses and not having staff for picking stock and things like that as well, which is obviously causing errors in picking, causing delays, etc. Materials, so glass shortage. I mean, I've spoken to several wine producers where they're looking to launch brands, and they say, oh, whoa, I can't actually launch it now. I haven't got any glass. I can't get any glass. I can't get any glass bottles. And I don't know if you guys have heard it from a Coca-Cola point of view, but a couple of people have mentioned to me that Coca-Cola aren't pushing glass bottles at the moment because it's just not there. The actual glass availability isn't there. I've put about limited availability. So limited availability is always a problem in certain places, but I've made the note there about climate and fires, because related obviously to a certain extent, but I think with the climate now, you're getting in, I don't know, like say the Rhone Valley, where you get Châteauneuf-du-Pape and Côte d'Rône, which I'm sure everyone on this call is probably aware of Châteauneuf-du-Pape and Côte d'Rône. And down in the southern Rhone now, it's getting so hot that actually they'll have much more limited harvests, and when they do get the harvest, it's going to be 14.5%, 15% alcohol for wines like, and especially when you've got a Côte d'Rône, which is an easy drinking red wine, 14.5%, 15% is not what people want from an easy drinking red wine. And then the fires, obviously, I mean, well documented, California, south of France, which are obviously hammering availability. And again, anyone who's in a hotel, I'm sure, is aware of the Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, the New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc issues that have happened in the last year, where they just had a really small harvest for 2021. I mean, 2020 wasn't a massive harvest, but 2021 was very small. And the UK has just become absolutely addicted to Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc in recent years. So that's caused a lot of confusion for hotels, restaurants, in terms of substituting for products they can get ongoing. But even retailers, you go into Sainsbury's and you see in the New Zealand section, you see a shelf of things that are not from New Zealand, but I've got a sign next to them saying, if you like New Zealand, try this, because the availability was such a problem. Luckily, 2022 is nearly 50% up in terms of New Zealand production on 2021. So hopefully from that point of view, it won't be too much of a problem, but it does lead on a little bit to what I've just said in this next one about wine producers' lost earnings. So if you are a New Zealand producer and your volume was so much lower in 2021, obviously you've got to pay your bills. You've got to look at the costs. And then the one thing I've put specifically there, I was well aware of this being from the wine industry, but I'm not sure whether it was widely known, but in South Africa during the pandemic, they did actually have a total ban on any alcohol sales. So they were not selling any alcohol in South Africa for a while. So it wasn't just about exports stopping or restaurants closing. Obviously, in the UK, people who supplied hospitality, of course, were really, really badly hit, whereas actually in South Africa, it just totally stopped. So you've got a lot of producers over there now that have got a lot of stock, but really, really do need to move the wine because they just didn't have that opportunity to sell anything at all. So yeah, so I think in general, a lot of the problems facing it, but hopefully a few of the bits I'm going to come on to now are going to help out on that front. If you're a hotel operator, or even, as I say, in procurement, that some of these points might be good advice to give to your clients. So how can you manage the increased costs, logistical issues and demands on wine whilst delivering a well-priced and interesting wine range for your customers? So again, during Andy's talk last month, there were several mentions of having a good quality range as well as having the price point, because obviously anyone can sell a wine for a set margin, but are the customers happy with it? So I've broken this down into 2 slides. So again, referring to what Andy said last time about the importance of tenders and key products and the tenders, obviously in terms of beverage, they're as important as ever. What I've just put here in terms of new considerations, so obviously, as Andy said, key products and selecting on tender is all very good, whereas what I've just noted here is some stuff that maybe people wouldn't have previously considered as part of a tender in terms of wines, which is obviously I've noted in here. So smaller minimum orders, ordering mixed cases, sale and return. So for hotels that are doing weddings and events, especially now we're in this real boom of no and low. So no and low alcohol drinks. More and more people are turning up to a wedding and driving, or even if they're not driving, sometimes they're not drinking. So if you're going to bring in a few hundred bottles for a wedding or event or something like that, I think points on sale and return. Not everyone is so keen to do sale and return as a supplier, and also not many of them are very well set up for it. So that's another consideration to put in there. And out of stock procedure, because since these issues happened coming out of COVID, and certainly during the pandemic, shipping was an absolute nightmare, but it's obviously continued, as again Andy touched on briefly last month. But you may well have suppliers that are quoting where they come to you and say, I'll use New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc as an example. They'll say, right, they'll show you a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, you taste it, it's a good quality wine, it's a good price point. However, if they've got nothing else in their portfolio that touches that quality and that price, you want to be aware of that. You want to know what other options they've got. So actually not necessarily on every single one on the list, but I think in a lot of cases you want to get two options, 2 suggestions, because I'm seeing so many places now. I used to, after recent months, I used to having substitutions sent. They're used to receiving a wine that's a different brand entirely, and they weren't told about it. And actually they've got to the point where some customers just won't even raise it now. They might look at their invoice and see it's the same price, but they won't say, hang on a minute, I've been sent the wrong thing, because they've been so used to getting sent substitutions. So yeah, I think that's a key point there in terms of, as I say, trying to get decent substitutions in place, because as I say, the way the shipping delays and stuff are still continuing. It's something that you want to know is there for your peace of mind. I'll put don't get too attached to particular brands. So I've noted there what I mentioned earlier on about spirits and beers in terms of the way you get support because it's a brand and someone's trying to build their brand. Likewise with soft drinks, spirits, beers, softs, people tend to be chasing brands. With wine, it's not so much. You get obviously the champagnes, you get basically the stuff that's owned by Moet Hennessy, so the kind of the Moet champagne and the Cloudy Bays and things like that are recognised brands. However, they're obviously very, very premium. So in terms of your day-to-day dealings, no one's buying wine for hotels based on the strength of the brand. So it may be, say for example, everyone knows that golf clubs don't like change, for example. So if you're a hotel that's got a golf club and golf club members attached to it, they might say, oh yeah, we love this wine, we love this wine, we love this brand, but it's generally the brand doesn't cause a problem. So my whole point here is basically to ensure that you have cost ceilings for your key wines, because it happens a lot in the industry. Not only, it's the same for importers. Sometimes with wineries will come to you and say, oh, our wine needs to go up to this price. And there always needs to be a negotiation in place where you can say, okay, you're proposing this price, but just so you're aware, our gap for this wine sits at this price bracket. And if you go above that price bracket, you are no longer fitting for that position. So as I say, I've made that point because it really isn't, although you might get a few comments on it from one or two people, as I say, certainly when it comes to kind of golf clubs and members clubs and things like that. But generally, if your wine list's formatted in the right way, it's going to be much more about the grape and the region. And then again, this is something that, I mean, Simon mentioned this on LinkedIn actually with regards to food. Just the other day I noticed, but view your suppliers' full portfolio. Again, I've seen it. I'm sure everyone's probably seen it. You'll get products put in the spreadsheet, in the proposal, and it is so important to view the full portfolio, because there will be, I mean, I've put there about higher margin, but also brand targets for suppliers. So a lot of the big London wine merchants are fighting for the UK agency for the big brands, because obviously inevitably once they are the representative of that brand in the country, they get new trade customers come and find them because they're the ones that have got it. So I think that because they have those brand targets, there will be lots of products that will get put on your list that you don't necessarily need. So example of that, I did so in terms of the wine list reviews I do wine list reviews for hotels, restaurants, pubs, and I did a wine list review for a pub that was tied to a brewery in terms of supply not too long back, which is on my website as a case study of it on my website. I didn't actually mention this point in the case study that I'm about to tell you, but basically when I was reviewing his list, I looked at it, and with most pubs, they need a sweet rosé and a dry rosé, basically, typically a Zinfandel rosé for the sweet option. I was studying what he had in place. He had a Zinfandel rosé, good price, and I looked at it, I said, right, okay, that one doesn't need changing. That's spot on for what you need. And then so I put together a margin sheet for him, a proposal for him for him to then send on to the brewery, and he was in communication with the brewery about his list. He got in touch with them, and they sent him a proposal back, not highlighting the fact, which I noticed but he didn't, that they had substituted the white Zinfandel that he wanted and that I said was right for him for another one that was £1, over £1 more expensive a bottle, and left the selling price exactly the same. And the previous landlord of this pub that had been in there, who couldn't make it work, funnily enough, had a wine list done by the brewery with no margin sheet alongside it, just here's your wine list. And when I'd studied the margins on that list that he'd inherited, it had Sauvignon Blanc and Malbec were the lowest margin products on his list. And I think everyone here knows that Sauvignon Blanc and Malbec are hugely popular, important products for any wine list. So as I say, that point there, that these guys clearly had a white Zinfandel that was perfect for this venue. It was already in this venue, and they tried pushing this other one in that was not going to work for the customer at all. Is very much the point on that front. And then, so the second point, so breaking it down, so delivering a well-priced and interesting wine range for your customers whilst dealing with these cost issues. So I've put on here, not every wine has to earn full margin to make your wine list highly profitable. I mean, obviously, there will always be people looking at it with from a financial point of view. However, I've put on here how 99% of wine lists, certainly in the UK is my experience, all the volume goes through just a handful of key products. So you can, in most cases, feature a few bits that aren't necessarily going to be massive products in your overall spend, in your overall margin, but they offer something interesting for people who might want something a little bit special, a little bit different to most lists. So, I mean, I did a wine list review for a gastro pub, and we I'll go. Yeah, so when I mentioned about the punching above their weight, we found this pair of a white and red Chilean wine. They actually were, but Sauvignon Blanc and Merlot. And in terms of the quality and flavour, they punch well above their weight for the price point. So I structured the list in a way that had those. Basically, a lot of the rest of the list was at 67, 68% GP, and these were at 72.5% GP because they did punch above their weight so much, and they were two of the top sellers on the wine list, and no customer had a problem with it because, as I say, they'd very much been selected based on the quality, but the quality was so good for the price point, so it enabled the operator to make very good margin on it whilst keeping the customers happy. So I've put here about don't be scared of offering premium wines by the glass for fear of wastage. So obviously wastage is a concern for a lot of people in terms of wine. You have more and more people trying to use verre de vin systems, Coravan systems to preserve the wines. You'll tend to find that actually, as long as you've not got a colossal range of wines by the glass, if your wines are half decent in the first place and they're actually tightened properly with the screw cap or the corks put in properly, they're going to keep for 5 days or so. And in a lot of cases, you don't really need the verre de vin system to keep the quality going. However, what I've put here is offer a slightly more limited range of wines by the glass to include 1 or 2 premium options, because it limits your wastage, because often you could have, I don't know, for example, 5 whites, 5 reds by the glass, and in the 5 whites you might have a couple that are taking a similar market, really similar price, similar kind of style. Whereas if you drop that down to 4 whites, 4 reds, and you've got something a little bit more interesting, it's less of a worry in terms of wastage and encourage a higher spend for you. So example, again, I've done a wine list for a restaurant not too long back, and they're very much going for a premium market. And again, there's so many places. So for example, in London, high-end Chinese, there's some amazing Chinese restaurants in London that the food is absolutely world-beating, but the wine by the glass range is really, really poor. They just have, say, a house white, a house red, a Sauvignon Blanc and a Merlot, and that's basically all they have by the glass, which is a bit of a shame when it comes to that kind of thing. But this particular restaurant, they're aiming premium. They've got beef and lobster on the menu that's 30 odd quid plus a dish. And I just said to the chap from the off, look, you need to include some kind of premium wines by the glass, that even if they're not noted on the menu by the food, but your staff are aware that these things will pair with the food. And since they opened, these have been their biggest sellers. So these products are lesser known, but very, very interesting wines paired to dishes like a white wine that crosses over, so their lobster and their pork, for example, and a red wine that goes great with their steak dishes, their beef dishes. And they're absolutely flying through these products, and they have got a slightly more limited range by the glass. So they've actually only got 3 whites, 3 reds by the glass, but they've got these particular wines that are a significant jump on price point ahead of the other ones, and actually are their top selling white. So one of them is a oak-aged Chenin Blanc, and it sells more than their Sauvignon Blanc by the glass because of the style of food they're doing and the way they've got it. They recommend it with that dish. And then I've just put about using a pass stock system and ordering premium wines by the bottle only. So it is a simple strategy. It's probably part of people operators are probably doing this kind of thing already. However, it's a huge help in terms of allowing. I mean, the pass stock system is fantastic because you can base it on your sales figures, your past sales figures. I mean, obviously factoring in things like bank holiday weekends, or making sure, if you're a hotel, making sure your events team are keeping you up to date on when the events are coming in, so you need to bring the extra stuff in. But aside from that, you can base it on past stock levels based on your average sales. And ordering the premium wines by the bottle is a huge help if your supplier's doing mixed cases, and you can have, I don't know, Chablis and Sancerres and Saint-Emilion Grand Crus or whatever it may be. It allows you to push into a slightly more premium offering without committing too much to stock. But yeah, so that's something to keep in mind. And then just some final tips based on knowing your market. So knowing your market in terms of your customers that are coming into your place already and your competitors. So I've put the first one about average spend. So I think studying your average spend on each wine category, so white or sparkling, white, rosé and red, is hugely important, because if you're going to review your list, if you choose to review your list, or if your supplier says, for example, I don't know, this wine's not available, we have to look at this other product, or for whatever reason, it's important to know where your spend sits, because it's I find it amazing how many operators have no idea where their average spend sits on wine. And actually, I've seen, I managed to correct something, luckily, when I was brought in by a hotel, nice hotel, and they were doing, this is going back to the New Zealand Sauvignon availability issues. So they had the New Zealand Sauvignon at nearly £10 a glass, and then they had a Chilean Sauvignon at £6 a glass. And when the New Zealand availability issues came, their supplier came in with a recommendation for a replacement for the New Zealand, which was a South African Sauvignon Blanc, which was the same price as the Chilean one. So they were proposed this. So luckily I was able to kind of correct it, because I kind of was brought in at that right kind of time. But basically they had two New World Sauvignon Blancs, which is not a problem. I mean, Chilean and New Zealand combine quite well, and a lot of places will have Chilean alongside New Zealand, with New Zealand as the premium. But they brought in these two, and they'd been absolutely motoring through the New Zealand at nearly £10 a glass. And then all of a sudden the supplier decided, oh, there's no New Zealand, so let's offer a South African at the same price as the Chilean, which obviously what that straight away did was drop their spend. They put that on the list. It's going to drop their spend massively, because the only Sauvignon Blanc anyone can buy is all of a sudden £6. You got two options for a £6 wine, but it's all of a sudden £6. And I think that kind of thing in terms of average spends is really, really important. I've put about studying the wine list of your competitors. So knowing how your key wines compare to the competition, the local competition. I mean, I mentioned to Simon when we spoke a little while ago about when Salt in Stratford, I don't know if many of you might know Salt restaurant in Stratford, and when he was first opening up, he asked me to help him out structuring the wine list. And first thing I did was say to him, who's your, I mean, I didn't know Stratford too well at the time. It's not really my area where I'm based generally, so I didn't know too much about restaurants in Stratford. And I said to him, who's your competition? Who are the other good restaurants around? And he told me 3 places. So I went off and studied the key products. So I say, for example, the house, so the entry level price point, the Prosecco, etc., just making sure that he was opening with a price list that people wouldn't walk in and say, well, hang on a minute, you're too expensive. Why would I come in there when these other guys do it? So we just kind of, I mean, his list, he's got 1 star now. So his list has obviously expanded massively. But I mean, you can do a prestige tasting menu wine flight in there now, where every wine on that list is more expensive than the most expensive one on his list when he opened. So it was a wine list to ensure that customers didn't come in there thinking, wow, you're super expensive. However, inevitably it's gone that way because the quality of his food is so good that they are now a very premium outlet, but people are obviously happy to pay it. I've put avoid using the same wines as competitors or large retailers. Again, this might be white noise. This might be that everyone sits here and says, yeah, well, of course, why would I take the same wine as a competitor or a large retailer? But it's, when obviously exclusivity is a fantastic thing, but when someone's looking at your pricing, if your customers can come in and clearly compare you on the exact same product to if you're a hotel operator to doing events, and the nearest other events hotel has got the same wine, maybe a couple of quid cheaper, it's an alarm bell normally. And I think when you, like, say for example, I'd use like Majestic for example. So Majestic wine, for those of you who don't know, they're absolutely flying at the moment in terms of retail, so direct to consumer, but equally on their commercial side with the business to business stuff, they're really, really building. getting much, much bigger. However, I know, because I know quite a few people who work for Majestic in the commercial side of things, I know that actually their commercial specific range of wines is not huge. So they're building it, they are growing it, but at this moment, you are highly likely to have products. If you use Majestic as a supplier for your hotel, you're highly likely to have products on there that are in the shop, at least a few of them. And obviously it's not necessarily the end of the world, but it's something to be aware of. And again, kind of leads on with the same supplier as your competitors. So obviously asking the question when you're choosing your supplier, it's not the end of the world necessarily to have the same supplier as one of your competitors if they are the right supplier for you in terms of the package they've offered you, the overall drinks package, the overall supply package, fantastic. But again, when we talk about tender processes, we talk about what stage you're at. I think it's important to ensure that these people. I was speaking to someone about doing a wine tender for a restaurant the other week, and I was, funny enough, it was a Majestic person I was speaking to, and I said to him, look, I'm aware you do this place over here, which is not too far away. Are you able to deliver this kind of setup, this kind of focus in terms of regions and countries and price point, and keep it different to down there? So I set that out with him from the off, because if he said to me, look, we don't really have the range like that, then of course I wouldn't be able to use him, because he want to keep it individual. But yeah, so hopefully, I hope that's given some people some nice hints in terms of helping to manage wine business, as I say, as a hotel operator, or in terms of procurement, because as I say, wine can be a fantastic earner for your business. And yeah, I've got these bits here about my magic. You see my magic wine list reviews on the page. I call them my magic wine list reviews. They're the ones where someone doesn't need to change supplier, because when I first speak to someone about not changing the supplier but increasing their price to that, you'd think it was magic. You'd think it was some kind of miracle the way that people react when it works. So yeah, hence the magic wine list reviews. But yeah, any questions at all?
Yeah, Owen, yeah, great presentation. I'm sorry I had to dip out for 5 minutes of someone at the door, but
thanks, Owen.
How did you manage the 2 New World Sauvignons at £6? What was the
so
answer to that one?
I went away from New World. So basically what the supplier had done, to be completely honest, the supplier had been quite lazy. They'd looked at their stock and they'd said, right, this is the other Sauvignon Blanc we have in volume at that time, and they put that in there, and there was no thought on average spend. Whereas I don't know if people on here are familiar with Sauvignon Terrain, so Terrain Sauvignon Blanc from Loire Valley in France. I went in that direction. So I think Sauvignon Terrain is obviously significantly lesser known than Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc. Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc is an absolute freak product in the UK, in a good way. I mean, it's people just absolutely love it and they leap at it. But what you get with Terrain Sauvignon Blanc is a real classy Sauvignon Blanc, real elegant style. And in terms of selling the product, what we did at the time was put a tasting note on the wine that compared it to Sancerre. So Sancerre and Pouilly-Fumé are these big brands in their own right in the Loire Valley, and anyone who tends to know anything about Sauvignon Blanc from the Loire Valley loves Sancerre. Sancerre is a brand in its own right. It might be a place, but it's actually a brand in its own right, so it's more premium. But I popped that Terrain Sauvignon in there, so the Terrain Sauvignon Blanc came in at pretty much the same selling price and buying price as the New Zealand that had gone off. So for me, it was an absolute no-brainer. You can take a high quality Sauvignon Blanc and pop it in there and keep the customer's spend in the same place. But like I say, it's just one of those. I mean, and it's not a particular supplier, I don't think. I think it's just a lot of people would look at it and say, right, we need that volume. And especially at the time, there was all sorts of shipping issues and delays. So they probably weren't, the supplier probably weren't spoiled for choice in terms of which Sauvignon Blanc they used. However, for me, I looked at it straight away and it was a huge alarm bell, because I thought, hang on a minute, you're selling a wine for £9 and all of a sudden they've got 2 £6 Sauvignon Blancs. It just doesn't make any sense at all for the business. Whereas the supplier was kind of ticking a box, just saying, right, that wine needs replacing. Okay, that's replaced, done. Whereas obviously that's the difference when I mentioned earlier on about when someone says, yeah, we have wine people who do that. And obviously that's the reason that someone would speak to me, because I will tell them what's best for their business, not what's best for the supplier. So, but yeah, so it did work out. It was good terrain Sauvignon Blanc, but I think Marlborough will just plough its way back in now and take over on most lists. Any more questions at all, guys? Anything I've missed or anything that was confusing at all in what I was saying?
Just interested to know how do you work? Do you like say that I'll give you a saving and a fee, or do you kind of work for a particular commission, as it were?
No, it's not. Yeah, it's not commission. It's done on. I do it basically. I mean, I do day rate if people need support on stuff. I do day rate, but also I do. You'll see on my website, I've got quite transparent. I mean, my web address is there if people want to have a peek, but it's quite transparent in terms of the price points that I do for the different reviews. I know a lot of people kind of say get in touch for the price, but for me, at the end of the day, it's important for me to put it out there. And yeah, so it's done most of the reviews. So what, interesting enough, something I should have mentioned is that the list review I mentioned earlier on, the one that is the one I do most, because it doesn't really involve a supplier change, so it's quite straightforward for anyone. And like I say, it can be done by people who are tied. It doesn't really matter. Is that it does stay on my website, but that it can be done entirely remotely as well. So I mean, ideally, when I do these kind of reviews, it's great to be able to visit a place, of course. However, if someone wants to get something done very quickly and they say, right, I don't know, for example, it's mid-August now and someone says I'm launching a new wine list in September and I'm based in Scotland, then it might not be easy for me to get up there. However, if someone gives me, I always, basically, when I mentioned earlier on about keeping customers happy when I produce my list reviews, is something I'm really, really focused on, because a lot of wine consultants will tell you what's best for you. They'll say, oh, this producer's fantastic, this supplier's fantastic, this wine's amazing, and that's all well and good, but the way I do every wine list I do, I study all the sales before I complete the review. So I take the customers, so when the customer gives me their information to start the review, the first thing I do is study all the products they're selling, study their average spends by the glass, on the large glass, small glass, bottle, study the styles of wine they're moving. So I know that when I create the list review, I know that I can do as much as I can to not upset people. So, I mean, Chardonnay is a funny one. For example, a lot of places, Chardonnay by the glass, if you've got 5 wines by the glass and Chardonnay is one of them, 99% of UK venues, Chardonnay will be the lowest selling wine by the glass. People tend to keep it there because it's, in a lot of cases, quite good with food. And it's a different style of wine to the other ones, but generally it will be the lowest selling wine by the glass in pretty much any wine list review you do. However, I did one where the Chardonnay was not their biggest seller, but it was selling regularly. They had several people going through Chardonnay every time they were coming in, who were in a few times a week. So the Chardonnay fixture on the list remained. So yeah, so I do it like that, but it's the whole let's say that basic sort of my easiest package, if you like, my basic list review where people don't have to change supplier, can be done entirely remotely. But there's so many ways you can add to that. I mean, wine training, so I offer wine training for hospitality. You can do the way your wine list is formatted, say for example with hotels, actually having different wine ranges for the hotel, restaurant, and for the events. Some people do that, some people don't, and that can in some cases limit. Say for example, you've got essentially an events wine list of a limited number of wines as your restaurant wine list. Your restaurant diners might be a bit underwhelmed by the range, so it works for your event but doesn't work the other way around. And actually having those 2 wine lists or different outlets within your venue can actually be used really, really effectively to boost your spend, very effectively to boost your spend as a hotel.
Anybody else got any?
Edwin, just I found it really interesting, and It's interesting what you say about that wines can be kept maybe for up to 5 days without like caravan, which I think is really interesting. And I like, you know, venues that do serve more interesting wines by the glass. Just where you were saying now about traveling to look at venues, you know, so you can get kind of a real flavour of what they're all about, match the wines accordingly. I just wondered where you were based.
Oh, we're based in Bedfordshire.
Bedfordshire, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, but yeah, as I say, it's the ideal way of doing it. As I say, that Stratford opening I mentioned before, I really didn't know the area at all, and he was able to tell me the competitors, but obviously not many people these days. Well, a small percentage of people have their wine lists on their websites, so it's not overly easy to go ahead and research from a distance. But yeah, again, some people have they've looked at their competitors' wine list, but because again, I'm sure most people on this call, hoteliers and procurement guy, you guys have probably got very wide-ranging skill sets across hotels. My skill set is wine, basically wine and hospitality wine. It's my skill set, so I would spot something that a lot of people wouldn't have done, because obviously that's my area of specific expertise. But yeah, it does help to see venues. But as I say, because I do hospitality wine training as well, and you see if you have a peek on my website, I've got a very big thing on how I operate, which is no wine snobbery. I'm not a wine snob. I've always liked to carry out wine training and do wine tasting notes and things like that normal people can understand, because I do think that the wine industry as a whole, it does alienate a lot of people. It confuses a lot of people, and again, you see tasting notes on products and things where you think, well, I work in wine and I don't really know what that means, the tasting note, whereas the everyday consumer just wants to know, is it full-bodied or light-bodied? What fruit does it taste like? Whereas you get some absolutely bizarre stuff, but it's unfortunately, you see it even in the supermarkets. You see that generally, in terms of wine, you get wine people buying the wine, and they only know it one way. So, for example, supermarkets really struggle to educate young wine drinkers and people they should be attaching to their market. And unfortunately, what's ended up happening with wine is really for your certain age groups now. They're drinking gins, rums, no and low alcohol. To be honest, no and low alcohol is getting huge as well. But the wine market has really struggled as a whole to open itself up to younger markets. But like I say, I like to think that when I do my trainings, and if I'm doing it with, say, for example, hospitality staff, and you've got young teams in hospitality, some of them, certainly the way we are at the moment, will be new to hospitality as well, that I can deliver wine training to people who don't really know about wine can just pick up key details, key unique selling points, etc., and not baffle people with soils and climates and things like that, because that's just not something that most people understand at all.
Anybody else have any more questions?
Yeah,
any
quick
more
question.
comments?
Quick question for Owen, if I may. Great presentation, and thank you. I'm just curious. Obviously, I come from a generation where wine bars were a burgeoning business, and they seem to have slightly slowed down since the invasion of Aldi and Lidl's. But how many of your client base now actually look at things like popularity charts in terms of sales, other than just sales of stock? Do they actually take records of wine sales by the glass, half bottle?
It's funny. I think generally that not many people are looking out on that point. I think most operators I'd speak to would know their average spend on food when you speak to them quite quickly, or their overall average spend per head. But on a wine point of view, not so much. So, like, say for example, Pinot Grigio. We've all heard of Pinot Grigio. Pinot Grigio might not be my favourite wine, but it's a brilliant crowd pleaser and why it's become so popular. And I did 2 wine list reviews in 2 completely different places at similar times, to totally different businesses, totally different places, and the number of orders they had for products. So what I do in terms of looking at popularity is look at the number of orders they've had for a product rather than the turnover on a lot of those products. I mean, we still look at the turnover in terms of the overall increase, but in terms of looking at the products and which ones are the popular ones, you look at orders. So the tally of large glass, small glass and bottle combined, and all three of these places, both of these places with all three of those included, Pinot Grigio accounted for 11% of orders, exactly 11% of orders in both places, which gives you an idea that, I mean, it's like we're going on holiday. The general public all think that they've got a different move and a different tactic to everyone else, but everyone still sits in the queue. So I think it's that kind of thing, really. But yeah, generally, like you say, wine bars and stuff, they won't be looking at that kind of thing. And I think wine bars are a tricky one because obviously, if you're in London, wine bars are fantastic because people always want somewhere to store. Well, I say London, but big cities. I mean, London's the nearest one to me, so it's the one that I know mostly. But if you're in London, you're always looking for somewhere to sit down with someone and have a casual bite and a drink and a chat. Whereas wine bars that are in smaller towns struggle a little bit more because if they're not doing a solid food offering, it's more about small plates.
Yeah.
Selling, like I mentioned earlier on, the oak aged Chenin Blanc that I've put on this restaurant, and it absolutely flies. But if I had a wine bar or a pub, I would not suggest they put that wine by the glass at all because it just wouldn't really fit. As I say, these guys are pairing it to lobster and pork and things like this. It's a totally different market. But yeah, so generally people are not. As I say, wine, like I've said with my details here, wine will earn or can earn you an awful lot more money than most people allow it to, really. Because, but as I say, I totally get that spirits and beers. I've seen it. It's spirits and beer. You'll have good spirits brands coming in offering you deals to pour their vodka instead of the other vodka. And likewise with the beers, everyone wants to get their bar installed by somebody. They want to pay for the whole installation, so they need a brewery to come in and do that. Whereas when it gets to wine, it does get a little bit lost. But I say, hopefully, with the points I've put in there today, I mean, I could go on for hours in terms of tips and techniques in terms of increasing your wines. But hopefully, the stuff I've put there today, just some of it might have been a little bit obvious to some people, but hopefully it should help in terms of average spend to just action some of those points.
I think it's a good point you make there. I mean, I won't mention the names, but some of these big chains, they when they come to look at their sales, they go food, lunch, dinner, whatever, and then beverage, and it's just how much wine they sell. They don't actually split it down to how much beverage they've sold on a lunch, how much they're selling on a dinner, what their average spend are on those particular meal periods, even afternoon tea, you know, how many glasses of champagne are we sending, and so many times you see in hotels where they just don't really pay any attention to that beverage average spend, when actually with a good analysis of that information and then somebody good just training them on how to sell it, they can actually increase their sales and their profits quite exceptionally without having to increase the number of people sat in the restaurant. You know,
I think that's a really good point. I think one of my pet hates, I'm sure there's probably a lot of people here that have a similar pet hate, but one of my pet hates is when you go to a restaurant, they take you and sit you down, and then they wander off, and then they come back and ask you what you want to drink a few minutes later. And when you talk about beverage spend and you look at stuff like that, you could have a table of 5. They could do a bottle of champagne in that time if they're celebrating. And I think the amount of times I look at it with operators and I just think, oh, that's so easy. I mean, you get with well-trained groups, of course, you get straight away, they'll come and sit you down, right, can we get you anything to drink that first second? But a lot of people don't, and a lot of independents don't, which really wows me, because for me, it's very, very, very straightforward training. It sells more and you're giving better service. It makes the people happier and they're spending more money, which is absolutely win-win for everyone. But it's amazing how few people do it. It really, really is.
How are we getting on? Anybody else got any questions for Owen? Any comments?
Owen, when you do the analysis, do you ever of the Magic wine list reviews, do you ever get the supplier spend data as well? match that up with the sales data from EPOS?
I don't typically, Simon. I'll tell you, one of the reasons for that is that with wine ordering, you tend to get a lot of people who will, I mentioned earlier on about past stocks and ordering on past stocks. Most people don't order on past stocks. Most people will, whether it's a misplaced case in their cellar or behind their bar or something like that, most people are actually ordering out of pattern with what they're selling. So if you, with food, obviously, when it comes to fresh, it's, to the day. Let's say, for example, a customer could give you a analysis of what they've sold in terms of dishes, but it could be a couple of weeks out of date. Whereas obviously with the supplier, they can tell you exactly what's gone in there, and pretty much what the spend was, and when it's moved. But with wine, it's a little bit tricky like that, which, as I say, equally is why it lends itself to for operators to really focus on right now, because it is long life. It is a long life product.
The reason I asked was just I always get a little bit nervous about stuff that gets served but then not charged, and how many times you've been had a second bottle and it's not been charged.
No, it's a good point. I think that kind of thing, I would say, from a wine point of view, the accuracy of statistics would be better coming from the till than that. Whereas obviously I could see that food would absolutely, you need that background. But I think because honestly, you have so many people where I've heard people sort of say, I need to order 6 bottles of Pinot Noir, and then you actually look at it and they've got 3 and they sell 1 a week, for example.
And they've got a case propping the door open.
Yeah, exactly right. You see it all the time. You see it's and also people will, so say for example, something else that I do when I do my wine list reviews is I help people with the transition. So I don't just say, because again, that's really important in terms of your stock holding. You don't want to say, oh yeah, okay, the wine list we've got isn't perfect for us. This supplier's done a better offering for us, so we'll change to them. Because you've got a stack of wine sitting there from the other supplier that's now no longer on your list. So I'll always help people out with strategies for moving that stock as well. Because again, relating to your point, Simon, it's if you've got, I don't know, like I said, Pinot Noir just then, say you've got a Pinot Noir that was on your list before, it's by the bottle, it's 35 quid a bottle. It's not going to be one of your biggest sellers. It's probably a nice wine, but it's not going to be one of your biggest sellers. You might find that you've changed supplier, but you've still got that Pinot Noir selling. You're still, when someone orders Pinot Noir off your list, you're still selling that Pinot Noir because you need to sell it. So again, statistics when it comes to suppliers can be really misleading on that front, because especially when you get into places that have got premium wine lists. I mean, I've been helping with a 2-star in London, a 2-star Michelin in London, and that some of the stuff on their list is, I mean, colossal in terms of value. But obviously because a lot of it, I mean, they have a very, very high spend as a 2-star, but they do still, let's say, for example, they could have Bordeaux's and things sitting in their cellar that they ordered from the supplier 6 years ago, and it wouldn't matter. So actually, in terms of looking at their actual figures, and I think it's always better to go through the tills, even though, like you say, there might be a few anomalies, but I think generally you're going to see the pattern. You're definitely going to see the pattern.
Yeah, I think there you're entering into that, Simon. You're entering into the realms of our stock taker friends who are, there's not one on today, but they'd probably tell you that it's their job to identify whether a bottle's not been sold, actually charged for or not, as opposed to what to put on the wine list in the first place. But
I'll stop me share anyway. I'll get this out of the way for you guys.
Okay. Well, we're nearly at the top of the hour. Anybody got any last minute comments or last minute questions?
I'd just like to say thanks a lot, Owen. I think that was very interesting. It's one of those areas, you're right, that is often overlooked. It's quite, hotels are very happy to sell the Prosecco, and they're very happy to have a nice branded ice bucket on top of the bar. But after that, the thought process seems to disappear a bit, really, doesn't it? So
yeah, absolutely. There's a huge depth to it. There really is. There's a huge depth to how you can, especially as a hotel, honestly, especially as a hotel, because you can have several outlets, you can have your events, you can have your restaurant, you can have a bar, you can have al fresco bars. There's so many strategies to increase your spend that a lot of people don't know about. I mean, it's the same with beers to a certain extent, but far more with wine in terms of people just not focusing on it.
Okay, brilliant. Well, I think we'll call it a day for today. Thank you everybody for attending. Hope to see you again next month, and as usual I'll be sending out the summary. I'll get a copy of Owen's slides, send that out with a copy of recording link as well afterwards, and have a nice day everybody.
Perfect. Cheers,
Right.
Robin.
Cheers, Owen.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
See you.
Bye.